Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be your storyteller today. Many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain guide you into the story. The rain had already started when I arrived at Hollow Hill. It wasn't heavy, just a steady curtain that made everything shimmer like an old photograph. The road that led up to the mansion twisted through a forest that seemed older than the town itself, its trees heavy with moss and silence. I parked just outside the iron gate, which opened on its own with a soft metallic groan. The house stood tall beyond it, massive, dark, and wet with memory. I could smell the wood rot before I stepped out of the car. My name is Clara, and I restore historic buildings for a living. I wasn't supposed to be here alone, but the agency called last minute to say the caretaker had canceled. They asked if I'd be willing to do the preliminary survey myself. I said yes, without thinking. It wasn't the first time I'd dealt with old abandoned places, but something about this one felt different, like the house wasn't waiting to be restored. It was waiting for something else. The keys had been left in a box near the front door, just as promised. As I stepped inside, the sound of rain shifted, from open, rhythmic tapping to something more closed, muffled, as though the house absorbed it. The scent of damp paper and wood filled the entry hall. Wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the chandeliers above swayed gently, though no wind passed. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The silence was dense, not empty. Listening. I made my way through the ground floor, noting warped floorboards, cracked windows, dust-coated furniture. Every step I took echoed a little too loud. There was a grand staircase, a library with locked cabinets, and a dining room where all the chairs faced the same wall. I jotted notes in my binder, mostly mundane things. But my hand hesitated when I passed a narrow hallway that didn't appear on the floor plans. It ended in a door with no handle. I pressed my ear to it, unsure why. No sound, just cold wood against my skin. I stepped back, made a note to check it later, and continued. Upstairs, the bedrooms were in better shape, still dusty, but intact. I opened a window in one of them and looked out across the back lawn. The rain hadn't let up. It tapped rhythmically against the glass. And that's when I first heard it. A soft, distant weeping, like someone crying far below the floor. I closed the window, but the sound didn't stop. It wasn't loud, just soft enough to make me doubt I'd heard anything at all. I stood still in the bedroom, holding my breath, listening. The weeping wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within the house, low, rhythmic, fragile, like someone was mourning something long forgotten. I followed it down the hallway, but with each step, it seemed to drift farther away. The second bedroom was colder than the others. The wallpaper was torn, revealing crumbling plaster beneath. On the dresser sat a single porcelain doll, damp from the moisture in the air, its painted eyes chipped and looking slightly upward. I didn't remember seeing it when I passed earlier. I approached slowly. The crying had stopped. I reached out to pick up the doll, but just before my fingers touched it, a loud knock echoed through the house, from the front door. I jumped. The sound felt too sharp, too sudden in a place that had been so quiet. I hurried downstairs, my boots echoing against the hollow floorboards. But when I opened the front door, there was no one there. Just rain, and the winding path behind me. I stepped outside and looked around, expecting to see a car, a shadow, anything. Nothing. The iron gate stood shut. The trees swayed slightly, as if watching me. I waited a moment before stepping back inside and locking the door. On the table, near the entryway, something had been placed while I was gone. A small object, wrapped in a damp piece of cloth. I hadn't left it there. I picked it up carefully and unwrapped it. Inside was a brass key. Old, ornate, and slightly rusted. I turned it over in my hand, unsure where it belonged. None of the doors I had seen had locks that matched, but something about it felt deliberate, planted, as if it was meant for me. I carried it upstairs and tried it on the bedroom doors. Nothing. Then I remembered the hallway, the door with no handle. I returned to it, heart pounding, and held the key against the wood. It didn't fit anywhere, but as I pressed it gently to the surface, I felt a click, inside the wall. A low mechanical shift. The air changed. Cold rushed over me like a breath. And somewhere deep in the house, I heard the weeping again, closer this time. I took a step back from the door, suddenly unsure if I wanted to know what lay beyond it. The house had gone still again. No wind, no creaks, just the sound of rain above, and that quiet weeping buried somewhere beneath it. I placed the key on a nearby table and told myself I'd revisit it tomorrow, in daylight. But I didn't believe that. Something had already changed. The house wasn't just old, it was aware, and it had noticed me. That night, I tried to sleep in one of the upstairs bedrooms. I chose the one with the least amount of mold, and the bed that didn't sag too much. I left the hallway light on and kept the door cracked open. The storm had picked up outside, wind brushing against the windows in soft, sweeping waves. I curled up under the musty blanket and closed my eyes, hoping to shut out the feeling that something was watching me from the hallway. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up. Not because of a sound, but because of the absence of one. The rain had stopped, completely. I sat up slowly, my skin cold with sweat. The house was silent. Too silent. Even the wind had gone. I listened. For a moment I heard nothing. Then, from the floor beneath the bed, a single sob. Small. Hollow. A voice that didn't belong to me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there, eyes wide, waiting for it to come again. But it didn't. Not then. Just that one sound, like a crack in the night. I leaned over and looked under the bed. Nothing. Dust, wood, a pair of old slippers that hadn't moved in decades. I laid back down, but sleep didn't come. My ears strained for hours, listening for the next cry, the next shift in air, the next breath that wasn't mine. By morning, the rain had returned. A light, steady tapping against the roof like it had never left. I got dressed slowly, every movement heavy. The house felt different. Not hostile, not yet, but aware. As if my presence had stirred something. I made coffee in the old kitchenette and stood by the window, staring out at the overgrown lawn. And in the reflection of the glass, just behind me, I thought I saw a figure standing at the top of the stairs. I turned around quickly, heart pounding, but the staircase was empty. Nothing but dust and stillness. No footprints. No sound. But the sense of being watched lingered, clinging to me like the dampness in the walls. I checked every room upstairs again, one by one, trying to reassure myself that I had imagined it. But deep down, I knew better. The house had begun to show itself. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Later, as I reviewed my notes in the study, I heard it again, the weeping, this time clearer, not behind walls or beneath floors, but echoing faintly from within the walls of the very room I sat in. I pressed my hand against the paneling, unsure what I expected to feel. The wood was warm, like skin under breath. The weeping grew louder for just a second, then faded again, like a voice moving deeper into the house. I stood there, frozen, until the grandfather clock in the hall struck once. Just once, though it was already mid-morning. I looked over at the brass key on the table, still slightly damp. Something told me it hadn't unlocked a door. It had awakened one. A mechanism. A memory. A piece of the house that had been waiting. I picked it up again and felt the faintest vibration in my palm, like something behind the walls recognized me. I walked to the hallway with the handleless door, key in hand, and stood in front of it again. I listened. Nothing now. Only rain outside, and the tick of the grandfather clock behind me. I pressed my ear to the wood. Still nothing. But I knew I couldn't walk away this time. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a pencil, and wrote one word across the door. Why? That night I woke to find the door slightly open. The door hadn't been open when I went to bed. I was sure of it. I remembered standing in front of it, staring at the word I'd written. Why? Then turning away. Now, in the dim gray light of early dawn, it stood ajar by just an inch. Enough to see the shadowed space beyond. My throat tightened. I reached out slowly, hand trembling, and pushed the door open. It creaked low and long, a sound like breath exhaled through wood. Behind it was a narrow staircase, steep and twisting downward into complete darkness. The air spilling out from below was cold and damp, smelling of mildew and something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. I stood there for a long time, undecided. Part of me wanted to turn away, pretend I hadn't seen it. But curiosity tugged at me, steady and relentless. I turned on my flashlight, and the beam barely cut into the black. Still, I descended. The stairs groaned beneath my feet as I went down, each step deeper than the last. The walls were stone now, rough, wet to the touch, and closer together than I expected, brushing against my shoulders in some places. I reached the bottom to find a small room, no larger than a pantry. The floor was dirt. A chair sat in the middle. Just a chair. Old wooden, broken at one leg, and scrawled on the far wall, barely visible under layers of peeling wallpaper, were the words, "She's not alone." I stepped closer to the writing, brushing back the paper carefully. More words were beneath it, older and more erratic. "Don't trust the rain. She cries through us." Then a different hand. "The key is in the wallpaper." My breath caught. I peeled back more of the paper with shaking fingers, revealing not just stone, but something glinting, embedded in the wall, halfway hidden between plaster and time. I dug around it gently and pulled it free. A second key, thinner, silver, warmer. I left the room and closed the hidden door behind me. As it shut, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. The word I'd written the night before, why, was now gone. In its place, etched into the wood as if by fingernail, were two new words. Find her. I stared at it, heart pounding, and suddenly felt the full weight of the house pressing around me. The rain outside began to fall harder, and somewhere deep below, the weeping began again. I didn't go back to sleep. Instead, I sat in the library with the silver key resting in my palm. I examined every detail, its fine engraving, the smooth curve of its teeth, the way it never fully cooled despite the room's chill. It didn't match any of the doors I had seen so far. But it didn't feel random. It felt personal. Like it had been placed there specifically for me to find. Like the house wanted me to know it still remembered her. And now, it expected me to remember her too. That morning, I ventured into the nearby village to get fresh air and answers. The place was small, almost empty. A single general store, a post office, a bakery with a faded, closed sign hanging crooked in the window. Behind the counter at the store was a woman who looked like she hadn't smiled in decades. Her eyes met mine with a weariness that felt familiar. "You came from Hollow Hill?" she asked. I nodded, unsure whether to lie. "You should have left it alone," she said, almost kindly. Her voice was dry, her hands never stopping their slow work of folding paper bags. I asked if she knew who had lived there before. She didn't answer right away, just tapped her fingers against the wood counter. Then, "People don't live there. They linger." I pressed further. She looked up, finally, her gaze like glass. "If you start hearing crying, don't follow it." "That's how she finds you," I asked who she was. The woman only shook her head and turned away. Sometimes silence is all we're allowed to keep. I left with nothing but canned soup, a flashlight battery, and a dozen more questions. On my way out of the store, I saw a stack of old newspapers near the door. The top one was dated June 1974. The headline read, "Local Girl Missing After Storm." Below it, a picture of a child in a white dress. The caption, "Elise Hawthorne, age 8. Back at the house, I placed the article on the kitchen table. Elise. That name felt familiar, though I knew I had never heard it before. I went room to room, checking every lock again, every door, every drawer. The silver key didn't fit any of them, but I could feel it vibrating slightly in my pocket as I passed the walls, especially near the library, especially when the rain grew louder, and when I stood still long enough, I could swear I heard a voice whispering softly from somewhere behind the wallpaper. "Come find me." I returned to the library just as the sky turned a deeper shade of gray. Rain lashed the windows in sheets, now, louder than before, like it was trying to reach inside. The shelves groaned softly as I passed, as though they'd grown tired of holding the past upright. I moved along the north wall, running my fingers lightly over the wallpaper. The key in my pocket pulsed warmer here, like it recognized this place. I paused near a tall bookcase, one I hadn't paid much attention to before. Something was off. The bookcase wasn't flush with the floor like the others. A thin line of darkness peeked beneath its base, as if it had been moved once, and never put back properly. I pushed it gently, and it shifted more easily than I expected, revealing a narrow crack in the wall behind it, just wide enough for someone small to slip through. The wallpaper here was different, older, layers upon layers. I peeled it back slowly, revealing another message carved directly into the plaster. Elise sleeps here. The words stopped me. They were shallow, like written by a child's hand, trembling and unsure. I shined the flashlight into the gap and saw a crawl space, low and dark, with dust swirling in the beam like mist. I didn't crawl inside. Not yet. But the silver key grew hotter in my palm the closer I leaned. And somewhere in the silence, below the hum of the storm, I heard the unmistakable sound of a girl humming, soft and tuneless. A lullaby with no words. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bedroom. I laid a blanket on the couch in the downstairs parlor and kept the lights on. The house had quieted, but it was the kind of quiet that waits just before something speaks. I placed the newspaper article beside the journal I had started to keep. One line on the front page kept circling my mind. Last seen playing near the high, trees behind Hollow Hill Mansion. But no one had found her, just her footprints, leading to the water. At exactly 3:13 a.m., I awoke to the sound of tapping. Not from the window, not from the roof, but from within the walls. Steady, deliberate, right behind the wallpaper in the library. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. 3 slow knocks, then silence, then a soft voice, close. So close I thought it was coming from the back of my own mind. A girl's voice, whispering just 2 words. It's me. I stood from the couch and walked slowly toward the library, each step heavier than the last. The house didn't resist me, it guided me. The lights flickered as I entered the room, casting shadows that swayed without cause. I stopped in front of the bookcase, now slightly ajar from earlier, and pressed my ear to the wall. Silence at first, then a sigh. Not mine. A small breath, just behind the plaster. I whispered, Elise. And the moment the name left my lips, the tapping started again. Faster now. Urgent. I moved the bookcase aside and faced the crawl space once more. The silver key buzzed faintly in my hand. I dropped to my knees and leaned in. The air was cold, sharp with dampness and dust. I couldn't see the end of the narrow passage, but I could hear something. Movement, soft and rhythmic, like someone rocking slowly back and forth. I slid the key forward into the dark, just to see what would happen. The sound stopped. For a full minute, there was nothing. Then the key slid back to me. I stared at it, heart hammering. No one had spoken. No hand had appeared. But the key was there, resting gently at the edge of the opening as if returned. A refusal. Or a message. I picked it up with shaking fingers, then noticed something new. Scratched into the metal, faint but fresh. Don't unlock her. My mouth went dry. I backed away from the crawl space and replaced the bookcase, the hum in my ears louder than the rain outside. Before I went back to the couch, I turned to glance once more at the tall shelves. One book had fallen from its place. I picked it up. A child's storybook, water-damaged and swollen with age. I opened it to the middle. There, between 2 pages, was a photograph. Faded, warped. A girl in a white dress standing in front of the mansion. Behind her, in the window, my window, was the shadow of a woman, watching, smiling. But her smile was wrong. and her eyes looked exactly like mine. The next morning, the rain hadn't stopped. It had simply changed. No longer pounding, no longer insistent. Just a soft, steady drizzle that made the house feel wrapped in cotton. I moved slowly, my limbs heavy, my thoughts fogged like the windows in the hallway. I hadn't truly slept, only drifted in and out of shallow dreams. Dreams of humming, of damp walls, of keys that melted into my hands. I stood in the kitchen, holding the photograph from the storybook, unable to look away from the woman in the window. She looked like me. Not exactly, but enough to make something deep in my chest tighten. The resemblance was unmistakable. I flipped the photo over, hoping for a date or a name. There was nothing. Just water stains and a faint smell of mildew. I placed it on the table and turned on the old radio in the corner, hoping for voices, music, any sign of the outside world. But it only hissed, static. And then, for just a second, a child's voice whispered through the crackling, "I see you." The sound stopped as quickly as it had come. I switched the radio off and returned to the library. The room felt different now, less like a space for reading and more like a stage. The air was cold, still, expectant. I traced my hand along the spines of the books, pausing where the storybook had fallen the night before. The shelf behind it was deeper than the others. I knelt and ran my fingers along the back panel. One board was loose. I pulled it gently, and a small cavity revealed itself behind the wall. Inside was a bundle of papers, tied with string and soaked at the edges. I carried it to the desk and carefully untied the knot. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. Pages, and pages of what looked like journal entries, written by someone named Elise, older than 8. Some of it made sense. Other parts were complete chaos. Scribbled between lines were repeated words. I hear her in the walls. The rain isn't real. She cries through me, over and over like a chant, like a warning. Halfway through the bundle, I found a page with my name, Clara, written once, then again, dozens of times, as if someone was trying to remember it, or summon it. The final entry on that page read, "Clara stands where I stood. She will see what I saw." My throat tightened. I stared at the page until the edges blurred, and just then, in the stillness of the library, the grandfather clock struck once. But the hands on its face hadn't moved. I turned to the clock and stepped closer, watching its unmoving hands as the pendulum swung silently beneath the glass. It had struck. I had heard it. But the time hadn't changed. The face still read 3:13. The same time I had woken the night before. The same time I'd heard the tapping in the walls. I opened the clock's lower compartment and found nothing but dust and a faint impression in the wood, like something small and circular had once been stored there and recently removed. My fingers trembled as I backed away. The air in the library had grown colder again, not just in temperature, but in mood, a pressure, low and humming, like the house was holding its breath. I tried to return to the journal entries, but the words now swam before my eyes. I couldn't focus. I felt watched, not from across the room, but from within it. The kind of gaze that presses against your spine without ever touching your skin. I turned slowly, scanning the shelves. Everything looked the same, yet everything had shifted. A book fell. Not from a high shelf, not from where I was looking, but from behind me, where the crawl space had been. It struck the floor with a wet thump, like it had soaked up more than just time. I approached slowly and saw the title stamped on the cover in faded gold. Grief in the Hollow. I had never seen it before, and I'd walked these shelves a dozen times now. I picked it up carefully, opened it to the first page, and there was a name written in red pencil. Clara Hawthorne. Hawthorne. The same last name as Elise. I stood there frozen, lips parted, breath caught in my throat. I had no known relation to this place, no connection to the family that once lived here. At least that's what I thought. But seeing my name beside theirs, it did something. A memory. Not a true one, but something beneath memory. Fluttered in my chest. A hallway. A song. A woman humming near a window as rain traced down the glass. I shook my head, trying to dislodge it, but it clung to me like ivy. Suddenly the floorboards behind me creaked. Soft, deliberate. I spun around, heart racing. No one. Just the stretch of hallway beyond the door. But as I listened, I could hear it again. The weeping. Closer now, no longer muffled. A full voice, grieving quietly behind the books. Then something else. Bare. Feet stepping slowly across the wooden floor above me. One step. Pause. Another. The ceiling above groaned in response. I stood frozen as the sound passed directly over me and stopped. I couldn't bring myself to move for what felt like minutes. I just stood there in the silence, listening, heart thudding against my ribs like it was trying to warn me. The footsteps had stopped, but the presence hadn't. It lingered, just above me, heavy, watching, waiting. I backed slowly out of the library, careful not to break eye contact with the empty ceiling. When I reached the hallway, I heard something that made my blood go cold. A faint knock from the attic door upstairs. I hadn't opened that door since I arrived. In fact, I'd barely looked at it. It was sealed tight, with a rusted bolt and no keyhole. But now, it thudded once more, gently, like someone on the other side didn't want to be heard. I climbed the stairs one step at a time, the air thickening with every rise in elevation. When I reached the landing, the door stood exactly as it had before, still locked, still sealed. But the wood was warm under my hand, and I could hear a sound beyond it, breathing. Not mine, not mechanical. A slow, raspy breath, like someone asleep just inches away. I leaned in closer and whispered, "Elise?" There was no answer, just another breath, and then a faint, dragging sound, like fingernails tracing along the inside of the door. I stepped back, heart in my throat, and hurried downstairs. Whatever was up there, it wasn't ready to be seen. Or maybe it was waiting for me to be ready. And I wasn't. I returned to the photograph, the one from the storybook, the image of the girl in the white dress. This time I noticed something else, barely visible, in the shadows near the edge of the frame. A second figure, smaller, clutching the hem of the girl's dress. A child, younger than Elise, face blurred, legs soaked, and just beyond them, in the reflection of the window, stood that same woman again, the one who looked like me. Only this time, her eyes were open wider, and her smile had vanished. I flipped the photo over again, searching for anything I missed. In the corner, almost, hidden beneath water stains were the faded remains of handwriting. Both were lost. One returned. I stared at those words until my vision blurred. And in that moment, the lights in the house flickered. Once. Twice. Then held steady. The radio in the kitchen switched on by itself, the dial spinning through static, pausing on one voice. Mine, saying something I hadn't said. Come upstairs. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, frozen. The radio still crackled softly, but the voice was gone. Just static now. I turned it off, my fingers shaking, and stared at the staircase. I didn't want to go back up. Every instinct told me to leave the house, to drive until I couldn't see it in the rearview mirror. But something stronger held me there. Not fear, not even curiosity. Something deeper. Like loyalty to a memory I didn't remember making. The climb upstairs felt longer this time, like the house had stretched while I wasn't looking. Each step groaned louder than it should, echoing back on itself. The air grew thicker with every landing. When I reached the attic door, I didn't touch it. I just stood there and listened. No breathing now. No scratching. Just silence. I pressed my forehead against the door and whispered again. Elise? This time, a voice answered. Not hers. Not a child's. A woman's. Calm. Familiar. You've always been here. I stepped back so fast I nearly lost my footing. My heart thundered in my chest as I fled down the stairs and into the parlor, slamming the door shut behind me. I collapsed onto the couch, gasping, and grabbed the photograph, again, gripping it so tightly the edges bent. The more I stared at it, the more wrong it felt. As if the image was changing. As if the longer I looked, the closer the woman in the window moved to the glass, watching me, smiling again. That smile that wasn't mine, but might have been. Knew I had to go. I had to leave the house, even just for a moment. I grabbed my coat and stepped out into the rain. But as soon as I crossed the threshold, I froze. The car was gone. The driveway was empty. No tire marks. No footprints in the mud. Just the sound of rain falling in every direction except behind me, where the porch remained dry, untouched by weather. I turned back to the house. All the windows were dark, but something moved behind them. Slowly. Purposefully. And then, from the attic window, a shape leaned forward. A pale hand pressed to the glass. A blurred face behind it. Not Elise. Not the woman. Me. I watched myself watching myself. And though I couldn't hear her through the storm, I could see it in her eyes. She was crying. Quietly. Endlessly. Like she had been for years. And the house wept with her. The next morning, the rain hadn't stopped. It was softer now, but constant. An endless veil that blurred the line between the house and the world outside. I stood at the base of the stairs, staring up toward the attic door, which was closed, again. I hadn't gone back up. I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure if I ever would be. Instead, I turned toward the gallery room, what had once been used to display portraits of the family. I hadn't spent much time there before. Something about it always made my skin crawl. The gallery was long and narrow, lit only by the pale gray light that filtered through stained glass windows. Dozens of paintings lined the walls, men and women in heavy frames, their eyes dull with the weight of memory. But one portrait hung alone at the far end of the hallway. It was larger than the rest, covered with a faded cloth. I approached slowly, heart already sinking with the certainty that it had been waiting for me. I pulled the cloth free. The face, staring back at me, was mine. Not exactly older, perhaps, worn, but unmistakable. The same eyes, the same line of the mouth. Signature at the bottom read, E.H. I stepped back, breath caught in my chest. My fingers tingled with cold. I looked down at the floor, searching for a plaque, a date, anything. But there was nothing. Only silence. I turned back toward the portrait and froze. The eyes were no longer looking forward. They were looking directly at me. I stumbled back into the hallway, breath uneven, and tried to make sense of it. A trick of the light, a coincidence, a forgotten relative. But the explanation felt thin, hollow, like it had been prepared for me ahead of time. I returned to the living room and opened my journal to write it down. As I reached for my pen, I noticed the pages were damp, not soaked, just faintly wet, as if they'd been left out in the rain. But I hadn't brought them outside. I flipped through them, searching for a dry space to write, and paused at a page I didn't remember creating. The handwriting was mine, but I hadn't written it. A sketch of the portrait, almost perfect in detail, filled the page. Underneath it, a note. She saw herself before she became herself. I dropped the pen. The house creaked softly overhead. And once again, from somewhere behind the walls, I heard that slow, steady weeping. I didn't go back to the gallery that day. Instead, I wandered the rest of the house, looking for proof that I was still real, still me. I touched every doorknob, opened every drawer, spoke my name out loud more than once. Clara, I whispered, just to hear it spoken by someone, even if it was only myself. The house didn't answer. It just listened. The floors gave beneath my feet like breath, and every mirror seemed to hesitate before reflecting back my face. In the dining room, one of the chairs had moved. I was certain of it. It now faced the wall, away from the long wooden table, its back pressed tightly to the wallpaper. I hadn't touched it. No one else was here. I turned it back, but the legs scraped against the floor with a sound far louder than it should have made, like stone grinding against bone. I stepped away quickly. The silence that followed felt heavy, like I'd broken something sacred. That night, the lights flickered again. Not all at once, but room by room. A slow dimming that followed me wherever I went. I lit 3 candles in the parlor and stayed there, wrapped in a blanket, journal in my lap. I tried to write something, anything, but my thoughts refused to form. Every time I started a sentence, I would forget where it was going. When I flipped back to read what I had written before, the ink was smudged into illegible curves. Except for one word, written across the margins in thin, looping script. Closer. I closed the journal and placed it on the floor beside me. The wind outside had grown stronger, and the rain tapped harder against the windows like fingers. As I sat in the candlelight, I noticed something in the reflection of the dark window glass. Movement. Not mine. Slow. Rhythmic. I turned, but the room was empty. Still, in the reflection, the chair in the corner was now facing me. closer than before. I hadn't heard it move, but it had. I approached it slowly, unsure why. As I got closer, I saw something resting on the seat, a folded piece of paper, dry despite the moisture in the air. I picked it up with cautious hands and unfolded it. One sentence, written in that same looping script. You were here when she vanished. My breath caught. The air shifted, and from upstairs, the attic door creaked open on its own. I stared up the staircase, heart drumming against my ribs, candle trembling in my hand. The attic door stood wide now, dark beyond the frame. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even gone near it since the voice answered me. But something had opened it, or someone. The cold coming from above was unnatural, not just in temperature, but in feeling. It reminded me of standing at the edge of a cliff at night, unable to see the drop, but knowing it was there. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight, echoing longer than it should. The candlelight flickered wildly as I reached the top landing, casting dancing shadows along the narrow walls. The attic itself remained quiet. I called out, barely louder than a whisper. Is someone there? No answer. Just the sound of rain on the roof, soft and steady. I stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and old fabric, like a forgotten trunk left unopened for too long. Dust motes spun in the candlelight as I moved further in. The space was cluttered. Boxes, cloth-covered furniture, broken frames. And there, leaning against the far wall, was another portrait. I approached it slowly, already knowing what I would see. It was the same woman, the one who looked like me. Only this time, she was seated in a chair, hands folded, eyes downcast. And in her lap, a child. A girl in a white dress, soaked from rain, her face hidden in her mother's chest. Below the image, a plaque read, Elise and Clara, 1892. I staggered back, nearly dropping the candle. 1892. That couldn't be right. That wasn't possible. I ran my fingers along the edge of the frame, half expecting it to vanish beneath my touch. But it was solid, real. And as I stared at it, something shifted behind me. A soft exhale. I turned sharply, candle raised, but the attic was still. Empty, at least visibly, but I could feel something in the corners. Watching. Waiting for me to understand what I already suspected, I left the attic in silence, closing the door gently behind me. I didn't bolt it. There was no point. Whatever lived in this house wasn't bound by locks. It was bound by memory, by the act of remembering. And I had begun to remember. The weeping had stopped for now, but in its place was something worse. Recognition. As if the house had been waiting for me to wake up to the truth that I had never really left. I returned to the parlor, needing light, needing warmth, needing anything human. But when I stepped inside, the room felt wrong. The chair that had faced me earlier was gone. Not just moved, gone. I looked around slowly, but it was nowhere to be found. Only the paper remained on the floor, fluttering slightly as if stirred by breath. I picked it up again, reading the words aloud this time. You were here when she vanished. Saying them made the walls feel smaller. I walked to the front door and opened it wide, desperate to see the outside world. But the path was gone. The trees, the gate, the gravel, all replaced by a dense gray fog. I stepped out onto the porch, but couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. No birds, no wind, just the sound of water dripping steadily off the roof. I called out. No answer. It was as if the house had moved, or the world around it had faded. I closed the door and leaned against it, eyes shut. I felt like I was losing parts of myself, not in panic, not all at once, but like memory eroding, slowly, purposefully. I tried to recall my mother's face, my apartment, what I had done a week before arriving. The images came but faded quickly, like writing drawn, in misted glass. In their place, I saw Elise's face, her eyes, that strange smile in the portrait. The weeping, though silent now, remained inside me. On the way to the bedroom, I passed the gallery again. The large portrait at the end of the hall was uncovered once more. My face stared back at me, but something had changed. The background, behind the woman in the painting, was different now, darker, wetter, as if the very air inside the canvas had turned to rain, and her hands were no longer resting on her lap. They were pressed against the sides of the frame, as if trying to get out. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even lie down. I sat by the window and listened to the storm gather strength. And as the house groaned softly around me, I began to understand. I hadn't found the weeping. I hadn't uncovered the secret. I was the secret. And the house was simply helping me remember what I had promised to forget. I noticed the sound first. Not the rain outside. It was something deeper, subterranean, a soft dripping that echoed up from beneath the wooden floors, even though the house had no basement. I stood barefoot in the hallway, feeling the boards. Beneath me pulse with faint moisture. Each step left a print. I hadn't spilled anything. There were no broken pipes, but still, the floor was wet, not soaked, just weeping. I knelt down and touched the floorboards. Cold, smooth, damp, like breath had been trapped underneath them for years and was only now being released. I pressed my ear to the wood. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then a faint splash, as if someone had stepped into a shallow pool far below the house. Then another. A slow, deliberate pace, moving just beneath where I lay. I pulled back, heart pounding. The footsteps stopped when I moved. The parlor rug had darkened overnight. A perfect circle of damp had bloomed beneath the coffee table. I lifted the fabric and found water seeping up between the floorboards. Not from above, not spilled, but rising. The same way the fog had surrounded the house. Slowly, unstoppably. I placed a bowl on the spot and watched. Within an hour, it filled. The rain outside had found its way inside. Or perhaps the house had begun to create its own. I spent the afternoon searching for the source. I pulled back rugs, moved furniture, opened trapdoors and storage panels. No leaks, no plumbing, but every room held a different scent now, earthy, wet, metallic. And the deeper I explored, the more the house shifted around me. Hallways curved where they hadn't before. Doors led to rooms I didn't recognize. The house wasn't just full of water, it was full of memory, saturated with it. By dusk, I noticed something even stranger. The paintings in the gallery, every one of them, now had small water stains along the bottom edges, like the subjects inside had been crying. Not tears from eyes, but from canvas. Lines of pale streaks ran down the frame edges, soaking slowly into the wood. I touched one, expecting it to be dry paint, but it was wet. Fresh. The kind of damp that only comes from something that's still hurting. I returned to the portrait of Elise and the woman, me, still sitting in the attic, still untouched. Or so I thought. Upon closer inspection, I saw a new detail that hadn't been there before. In the background, behind the two figures, the window showed rain falling sideways. Not outside, but inside the room. And in the reflection of the glass, a third figure had begun to emerge. Just a silhouette. Small. Watching from the shadows. Downstairs, the weeping began again. But this time, it wasn't faint. It was clear. Close. Coming from beneath the parlor floor. I sat cross-legged on the rug, directly over the spot where water continued to rise. I didn't speak. I just listened. The weeping wasn't just sound. It was a rhythm. A repetition. It looped, same notes, same breath, like a melody too broken to finish. And then it changed. Words formed in the crying. Not many, just one name. Repeated. Clara. My hands shook as I placed them flat against the boards. "I'm here," I whispered, not knowing why, not knowing who I was answering. The weeping stopped instantly. Silence filled the room like smoke. And then, beneath my palms, a vibration. Faint, like someone knocking from beneath. One tap, then two. Then a pause, then three. A pattern, not random. A message. Morse code, maybe, but older. Slower. Almost biological. I leapt to my feet and ran to the study, flipping through Elise's scattered journal pages. I found a line I hadn't noticed before, scribbled near the margin. She speaks through the floors, when the walls are too full to hold her. I read it over and over, lips moving silently. The house wasn't just haunted, it was overflowing. With sorrow, with voices, with something long buried that couldn't stay beneath any longer. That night, the entire west hallway flooded. Not with inches of water, but with a thin, continuous stream that poured from beneath the molding. Cold, clean, odorless. I followed it barefoot in the dark, tracing its path to a locked door I had never seen before. No knob, no keyhole, just old wood. As I stepped closer, I saw something carved into the door's center, deep and precise. A date. June 3rd, 1974. The day Elise disappeared. I ran my fingers across the carved date. The wood was damp to the touch, like skin soaked too long in water. The moment I made contact, I felt something shift. Not in the door, but in me. A flash behind my eyes. A girl's voice calling out through rain. A hand reaching for help. My body stumbled back as if pushed, but the hallway remained still. No one there. Just that soft stream of water, flowing silently from beneath the door, as if the house was crying from somewhere deep within. I returned to the kitchen and grabbed the silver key. It hadn't fit anywhere before, but now it felt different. Warmer, almost pulsing. I brought it back to the door, even though there was no lock, no visible mechanism. I held it near the carving. Nothing happened at first. Then, the wood beneath the date began to darken, spreading outward in a perfect oval, like water absorbing into paper. A single phrase appeared beneath the numbers. "You were the witness." My knees buckled. I sat on the floor, wet and shaking, as those words echoed through my head. I didn't understand. A witness to what? Elise's disappearance? The house's grief? Or something older, deeper? I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The air in the hallway had grown too dense, like trying to breathe underwater. My chest heaved as I crawled away, dragging myself across the soaked floor toward the stairwell. Back in the gallery, the portraits had changed again. Not just warped, rewritten, faces blurred, names scratched out, all except mine. My portrait now hung at the center, larger than before. My eyes no longer followed the room. They stared downward, as if in mourning. And beneath the frame, something new had been added. A child's handprint in water. Small, precise, pressed directly onto the wall. I stepped closer and touched the handprint. It was cold, like fresh rain. As my fingers met the mark, the chandelier above flickered violently. A gust of wind blew through the sealed room, and from somewhere above, perhaps the attic, perhaps the rafters, I heard a child laugh. Not joyful, not playful. A wet, broken laugh that ended in a gasp, like someone who had swallowed too much water. I backed out of the gallery, unable to look at the portrait any longer. My own face felt foreign now, like a mask the house had chosen for me. I stumbled into the hallway and caught my reflection in a cracked mirror. For a moment, I saw her again. Elise. Not beside me, not behind me, but within me. My outline flickered. My eyes shifted. And then, just like that, it was gone. But I knew what I had seen. The house wasn't just reflecting memories. It was replacing them. I wandered the rooms in silence, unsure of where I was going. The floor creaked under my steps, but no longer in protest. It welcomed me now, the way wood welcomes rot. Slowly, quietly, with warmth. I passed the locked door again, now dry, the carving still visible. I didn't try to open it. I wasn't sure if I wanted to see what waited beyond it, or if it was waiting for me to remember how to open it from within. I returned to the parlor and found the journal open on the floor. I hadn't left it that way. A new page had been written, not in my hand, but the style mimicked mine almost perfectly. A single sentence. "You were there the night she drowned." I whispered it aloud, trying to make sense of it. But even as I denied it, something inside me stirred. A shape, a flash. Water closing over a small face. My hands reaching. Too late. The storm outside grew stronger. Thunder rolled through the walls like a second heartbeat. I curled into the armchair, wrapping myself in blankets, but it offered no warmth. Just dampness. The room smelled like the lake now. Algae. Mud. Loss. I shut my eyes, but behind them, I saw the hallway again, the one from the dream, the one with no end. At the center stood a door, and from behind it, the weeping began again. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was in the room with me. Slow, steady, and soaked in memory. I opened my eyes, but I didn't move. Because for the first time, I realized something terrible. The house wasn't just weeping for Elise, it was weeping through me. I avoided mirrors after that night. Every time I passed one, I looked away. Not out of vanity, but fear. Fear that I would see her again. Not behind me, not beside me, but instead of me. My reflection had become untrustworthy, as if the house had peeled back a layer and shown me what lived beneath my face. Even the smallest glint of silver or glass felt dangerous, like a doorway waiting to open when I wasn't watching. But the mirrors didn't avoid me. I found one leaning against the wall in the upstairs hallway, a place I knew had been bare the day before. I hadn't placed it there, and when I tried to move it, it wouldn't budge, like it had grown roots into the floor. The glass was cloudy, speckled with age, but in the center, it was clear. And in that clear patch, I saw her. Elise, standing in a room that wasn't mine, wearing the white dress from the photo. Her head tilted, her eyes wide and blank. Watching me, I blinked, and she vanished. My own reflection returned, but I no longer trusted that version of myself. I sat in the hallway for a long time, staring at the mirror, waiting for her to come back. She didn't. Instead, a soft tapping started. Not from the mirror, but from the walls. Familiar, steady. I followed it to the bathroom, where the old medicine cabinet hung crooked on the tile. I opened it slowly, heart pounding, half expecting to see her staring back at me from the glass shelf. Inside was a single object, a child's hair ribbon, soaked with water, but resting perfectly dry on the glass. I lifted it carefully, the silk cool against my skin. It smelled faintly of rain and lilies. There was something tied inside, a slip of paper, curled and yellowed. I unfolded it with shaking hands. 4 words, scrawled in shaky handwriting. She still wears it. I didn't ask who had written it. I didn't need to. The house was answering its own questions now. Later that afternoon, I passed the hallway mirror again. This time, it was clean, perfectly clean, too clean, like someone had polished it with intent. As I looked into it, I saw the same hallway, but the wallpaper was different, older, faded, and a door stood where no door had ever been. In the reflection, Elise stood before it, hand outstretched. She looked at me through the glass and mouthed something I couldn't hear, but I read her lips clearly. Open it. I reached out instinctively, fingertips brushing against the cold glass. It didn't shift or ripple, but something inside me did. I felt a pull, subtle and deep, like being caught in a current I hadn't noticed before. The house around me stayed still, but the hallway and the mirror breathed. Elise's hand remained outstretched, waiting. I blinked once and she was gone. The hallway returned to normal. But when I turned to walk away, I felt something beneath my foot. Wetness. A trail of small, damp footprints had appeared behind me. Tiny, bare, leading from the mirror down the hall toward the gallery. I followed them slowly, heart sinking with every step. They stopped in front of the portrait, my portrait. But now, the child was in it too, Elise, standing beside the woman who looked like me, her hand raised toward the canvas surface. I hadn't seen her there before. I was certain. But now she stared forward, expression blank, eyes searching. I stepped closer. There was no plaque, this time. No frame alteration. Just the new figure, inserted quietly, like she'd always been there. I raised my hand and pressed it to the canvas, half expecting to feel paint. Instead, the surface felt like wet glass. Cold, slick, alive. My fingers left faint smudges that slowly vanished, absorbed into the surface like breath against a window. And then, just beneath my touch, Elise blinked. I staggered back. The air thickened instantly. The gallery lights dimmed, flickering like candle flames. The chandelier above groaned softly, swaying without wind. I heard a voice, low and quiet, almost beneath the floor. Not Elise's. A woman's voice, sharp with sadness. She wants to stay. I spun around, but no one was there. Just the portraits, watching, mourning, remembering. That evening, I found the mirror from the hallway moved again. This time it was in the bedroom, propped against the foot of the bed, facing me. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even been in the room. But it waited, clean and still. When I sat on the edge of the mattress and looked in, I didn't see myself. I saw the child, curled in a chair, clutching the same ribbon I now held in my hand. And she was whispering something, over and over. But the glass didn't let sound through, only presence. I leaned closer, trying to read her lips, but the words were lost in the rhythm of her breath. The ribbon in her hands was frayed, the bow undone, as though it had been knotted and retied 100 times. Her lips moved slower now, each syllable drawn out. Then she looked directly at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not at me, but behind me. I turned. Nothing. But the air had shifted. It pressed against my shoulders like unseen hands. I whispered her name. Elise. The mirror fogged slightly, just in the corner, and the child faded into the mist like breath on glass. My own face returned, pale, wide-eyed, older than yesterday. The ribbon slipped from my fingers and landed soundlessly on the bedspread. The room grew still again, but it wasn't empty. I could feel something in the walls, not watching, listening. Like Elise had left behind an opening, and something else had heard through it. I stood and backed away from the mirror. As I did, the bedroom door creaked open. I hadn't closed it. I never did. But now it moved slowly inward, revealing the hallway beyond, dim, quiet, and wet with reflection. The wallpaper shimmered faintly, and for a moment, I thought I saw water dripping upward, as if gravity had forgotten how to function in this place. I stepped through the doorway, and the mirror flickered behind me, showing a different hallway, entirely. I ran to the attic, unsure why. I just knew the answer had to be there. The door resisted me at first, swollen from the dampness in the wood, but gave way with a groan. Inside, the air was thick and warm, like the inside of a closed mouth. The painting of Elise and the woman still stood at the far end, but now, someone had placed a small mirror on the floor in front of it, round, old, framed in tarnished silver. Its surface pulsed like water. I approached cautiously and looked down into it. At first, I saw only my own reflection. But then, as my breath misted the surface, the image shifted. I saw Elise again, but not the child. A teenage girl now. Her eyes hollow, her hair damp and matted. She was whispering to someone outside the frame. I watched closely. A woman entered the mirror beside her. She looked exactly like me, but her eyes were empty. She placed a hand on Elise's shoulder and leaned in to say something. And though I couldn't hear the words, I understood them. She said, "You left her." The mirror didn't vibrate, didn't echo, but the meaning landed inside me like a stone dropped into deep water. The girl, Elise, didn't flinch. She just lowered her eyes and disappeared into the silver surface, as if swallowed by it. My reflection returned, but it wasn't entirely mine anymore. The features were mine, but the eyes, they were younger, like someone else was using my face to remember their story. I knelt beside the mirror, breath shallow. The floor beneath me was damp now, despite the attic's height. Drops of water clung to the rafters above like condensation in a cave. I looked up, and for a split second, I saw a girl crouched in the corner beams, watching me. Her arms wrapped around her knees, eyes wide, her soaked dress clinging to her frame. When I blinked, she was gone. But the water she left behind dripped slowly onto my shoulder. The air around me thickened, dense with a grief I couldn't name. My hands shook as I placed the mirror back where I'd found it, but the glass cracked, slightly beneath my touch. A single fracture, splitting my reflection in two. One half looked like me, the other didn't. The attic light flickered once, then steadied. The portrait at the far wall now had 3 figures in it. Elise, the woman, and a third, just behind them, fading into the background, blurred, becoming. I stood and left the attic, walking slowly, feet wet with memory. Down the hall, the mirrors had turned themselves to face me, one by one. Their surfaces fogged and cleared as I passed, each one showing a different version of me. Older, younger, lost, angry, crying. In one, I wasn't there at all. Just the empty house, the ribbon on the floor, and the faint outline of Elise standing alone. Back in the bedroom, the small mirror on the dresser had fogged completely over. I wiped it clean with my sleeve, but my reflection didn't return, just a blank space. And written in the condensation, 2 words appeared slowly, as if traced by an unseen hand. Remember me. The attic didn't creak that night. It whispered. Soft syllables bled through the floorboards above me, too quiet to understand, but too constant to ignore. I lay awake on the parlor couch, blanket pulled to my chin, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The chandelier swayed gently, though the air was still. Rain tapped against the windows like a metronome keeping time with something older than the storm. And above me, the voices rose and fell like breath. At first, I thought it was the wind, but wind doesn't speak your name. I heard it, clear and slow. Clara. Not a scream, not a moan, a whisper. Familiar, intimate, like someone calling me back into a memory I'd tried to bury. I sat up and waited, heart pounding, hoping it wouldn't come again. But it did. A second voice joined the first, smaller, higher. Don't let her go. I didn't know which voice scared me more. I climbed the stairs with bare feet, candle in one hand, the other gripping the banister. Each step felt softer than it should, like the wood had given up resisting me. At the attic door, I paused. The voices were louder now, not in volume, but in presence, as if the house had stopped pretending. I pushed the door open slowly, and the whispers stopped all at once. Silence poured over me like cold water. The candle flickered, then calmed. The attic looked unchanged. Same damp air, same boxes and frames. But the mirror on the floor was gone. In its place, an open book. Its pages soaked and glistening, but perfectly legible. I knelt beside it. The handwriting was familiar. Elise. She had written this. A journal. But the entries weren't about her. They were about me. Each page detailed things I had seen, felt, said, in order, word for word. Down to the moment I had picked up the ribbon. I flipped to the last page. It was blank, except for one line written at the very bottom. You are the end of her memory. I didn't know what it meant, but I felt it in my bones, in my breath. The attic floor beneath me was warm now, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. I stood and turned toward the shadows. And there, in the corner, a small voice spoke softly, not to frighten, but to plead. Finish what I couldn't. I turned toward the corner where the voice had come from. Nothing moved, but the air there was different, denser, as if shaped by breath. I stepped closer and felt the floorboard dip beneath my foot. Not from rot, from weight. The weight of something unseen. A child's presence, lingering in the dark. I knelt slowly, hands outstretched, whispering, Elise, what do you want me to do? There was no reply, only warmth. A soft, invisible hand pressing against mine. The book on the floor snapped shut behind me. I jumped, heart pounding, and turned to find it now resting atop a sealed box I hadn't noticed before. I approached it with care. The wood was old but unmarked. No dust, like it had been placed recently. A velvet ribbon held the lid shut, and tucked into the knot was a folded scrap of paper. I opened it with trembling fingers. The answer is, beneath the lake. 5 words. No signature, no explanation. Just that. I knew what lake it meant. The one behind the house. The one I had seen in the photograph, behind Elise in her white dress. I had never gone near it. Not yet. The fog had always been too thick, the path too hidden. But now, it felt like the only place left to search. I wrapped the ribbon around my wrist and lifted the box. It was lighter than it looked. Inside, I found a child's dress, white, lace at the collar, still damp to the touch, and beneath it, a silver locket. I held the locket up to the candlelight. The chain was tangled, the clasp broken. I pried it open gently and found a photograph inside. A blurry image of 2 girls, one older than the other. The younger one had Elise's face. The older had mine. I sat down on the floor, unable to speak. The house hadn't confused our identities. It hadn't mistaken us. It had merged us. Our lives, our memories, our grief. Bound together by something deeper than blood. Unfinished memory. The candle flickered. The air shifted. And then, all at once, the attic filled with soft breathing. From every corner, every rafter, every beam. Not threatening, not angry, just present. As if the house itself had drawn in a long, slow breath and was waiting for me to exhale. I stood, the locket still in my hand, and whispered into the attic. "I'm ready." From behind me, the small voice returned. "Then come to the water." I descended the attic stairs slowly, each step humming beneath my feet like a heartbeat beneath skin. The house didn't fight me, it guided me now. The lights flickered on as I passed, then off again when I moved on. The hallway stretched, longer than usual, as though the house was buying time, stretching out the moment before the truth. I passed the gallery without looking. I didn't want to see how many versions of myself the portraits had become. In the kitchen, the window facing the lake was no longer fogged. The mist outside had cleared, leaving only a narrow path visible between the trees. The ground glistened as if expecting footsteps. I took the box with the dress and locket, wrapped it in a towel, and placed it in my satchel. Then I stepped onto the back porch. The rain gentler now, more like a breath than a storm. It was almost welcoming, like the house wanted me to succeed, or confess. The path to the lake was shorter than I remembered. Each tree along the trail felt familiar, as if I had passed them before, but not recently. Perhaps as a child, or in a dream. The earth beneath my feet was soft, but solid. No mud, no slipping. It accepted my weight. I followed the trail until I reached the shore. The lake was still. Too still. Its surface like black glass, untouched by wind or rain. And across that reflection, I saw her, Elise, standing on the other side. She didn't move. She didn't wave. She simply watched. Her dress was soaked, clinging to her like the house clung to me. Her hair hung in heavy strands across her cheeks, and her eyes were not afraid. They were waiting. I stepped to the edge of the water, unsure if I should call out, if my voice would even carry across the mirror-like surface. But before I could speak, I heard it again, behind me. The voice, mine, but older. "This is where it ends." I turned around, but there was no one there. Only the trees, only the house, distant behind the branches. Yet the voice had been real. It had come from my own throat in a time I hadn't yet lived. I faced the lake again, but Elise was gone. The water rippled gently now, as if something had moved beneath it. The box at my side grew heavier. I knelt at the water's edge, heart thudding, and whispered, "What do I have to give back?" I opened the satchel with trembling hands and lifted the dress from inside. The fabric was cold now, colder than before. Not from the air, but from memory. Like it had spent too long in the shadows. I laid it gently at the shoreline, letting the hem touch the water. It floated for a moment, then slowly began to sink, pulled forward by a current I could not see. The ripples widened, circling outward like rings from a forgotten promise. Next, I took the locket. I kissed it before letting it fall from my fingers. It struck the surface without a splash, as though the lake had absorbed it completely. My reflection wavered. The woman in the water no longer matched me. Her hair was longer, her eyes tired. She looked like someone who had carried grief long enough for it to carve itself into her bones. But she nodded, slowly, as if to say, You've done your part. The wind picked up. Not harsh, not cold, just certain. The water responded, its surface shifting, and from beneath it, a voice rose. Not a cry, not a whisper, a song, broken, incomplete, but unmistakably Elise's. She was singing, not to me, but through me, as if her voice needed my breath to be heard. I closed my eyes and listened, letting the melody settle in my chest like a memory I had never lived. The house behind me groaned once, long and low. A release. A sigh. The ground beneath my knees grew warm for the first time. The rain stopped. The lake stilled. And for one perfect second, there was nothing. No fear, no sound. Just silence. The kind that only follows the truth. The kind that feels like a door closing behind you, not in front. I stood slowly, soaked in quiet. The air no longer clung to me. The path back to the house was clear, but I didn't rush. I knew now that I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking with it. Elise no longer wept, and neither did the mansion. For the first time, it was listening in peace. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt the change. Subtle, but everywhere at once. The floor no longer sighed beneath my weight. It welcomed me with a warmth I hadn't known since arriving. Raindrops clung to my hair, but the air inside, the foyer dried them instantly, as though the house itself was patting me dry like a grateful parent. The chandeliers glowed steadier, their bulbs no longer flickering in hesitation. Even the wallpaper's peeling edges seemed to settle back into place, smoothing like skin after a deep breath. I walked the central hallway in silence, listening for the weeping that had been my constant companion. Instead, I heard gentle ticking. Clocks I hadn't noticed before, all keeping perfect time. The hush felt thick with anticipation, not dread, as if the mansion were rummaging through its own attic of memories, deciding which secrets to hand me next. My footsteps left no echo. They simply merged with the heartbeat of the structure, an unspoken agreement that we were finally working together rather than at odds. In the library, every book that had once drooped with damp now stood upright, spines, drying like sails catching wind for the first time in years. Pages rustled softly, turning themselves, not in menace, but in invitation. I watched as one tome settled open to a family tree I didn't recall seeing earlier. The hawthorn line, branches intertwining through a century. Someone had penciled a name at the end. Clara, caretaker of memory. The handwriting mirrored mine, yet carried an older flourish, as though written decades before I existed. The gallery walls no longer bled water stains. The portraits seemed relieved, their paint brightening in minutes rather than years. My own likeness, now central, showed eyes clear, unclouded by grief. Beside it hung Elise's final depiction. Not the drenched child, but a smiling girl holding lilies, her dress crisp and dry. Underneath, a brass plate gleamed. Return to the silence of rain. I traced the engraving, feeling neither sorrow nor fear, only an ache of recognition, as if the house had stamped both our stories into metal for safekeeping. Upstairs, the attic door stood open, but the space beyond had transformed. No dampness, no stagnant air, only a gentle breeze smelling of cedar and lake mist. The cracked mirror lay repaired against the far wall, its silver surface gleaming like calm water. As I approached, my reflection split, not in horror, but in harmony. Beside me appeared the woman from the portraits, older yet peaceful, her hand resting on my shoulder within the glass. When she spoke, her voice echoed softly through the beams. Now the house remembers, so you can finally forget. I reached out and touched the surface of the mirror, half expecting the image to ripple or disappear. But it held steady. The older version of myself, calm, composed, smiled gently, as if to reassure me that nothing was broken anymore. Not her, not me, not Elise. The reflection felt less like a prediction and more like a memory waiting to happen. For the first time, I didn't look away. I let the image settle into me like warmth settling into wood. Behind me, the attic floor creaked. Not with tension, but familiarity. I turned to find the old trunk I'd once ignored now open. Inside were belongings I recognized but had never owned. A sketchbook filled with drawings I hadn't made. A rain-soaked scarf identical to one I wore as a child. And a pressed lily between 2 pages of a forgotten journal. I lifted the flower carefully, and it dissolved between my fingers, not in decay, but in light. The journal's last page contained only one phrase: "If the house remembers, the silence can rest." Below that, a date, June 3rd, 1975. 1 year to the day after Elise disappeared. 1 year after the storm that had first soaked her into the walls. I closed the journal gently and felt the attic shift. Not physically, but in presence. Like it had been waiting for me to accept that forgetting was never the goal. Remembering safely was. Downstairs, the radio turned on by itself. Not static this time. A melody. Simple. Lullaby-like. A song Elise had once hummed behind the walls now played clearly through the speakers. No lyrics. Just the tune. I followed the sound into the parlor and sat on the couch, where my journal lay closed but dry. When I opened it, I found that the pages had reordered themselves. My thoughts no longer scattered. They read like a letter I had written to myself, and finally understood. Through the front windows, the storm had completely passed. The fog over the trees had lifted, revealing the lake below as still and glassy as the mirror upstairs. Birds called distantly. The trees no longer leaned in. They stood tall, no longer protecting, no longer warning, just being. And in the hush that followed the final note from the radio, the house exhaled again. But this time I didn't brace for what might come next. I simply breathed with it. I stood and walked the hallway once more, slower this time, noticing the things I had missed before. A photograph hanging straight when once it hung crooked. A door that used to groan now opening without resistance. Even the floorboards beneath the portrait gallery no longer echoed with grief. They felt solid, resolved. The house had changed, not because it was rebuilt, but because it had been heard. I had listened. And in return, it had begun to heal. In the dining room, the chairs no longer faced the wall. They sat naturally around the table, as if waiting for company. A single place was set. Plate, spoon, cup of tea still warm. I didn't remember making it, but it didn't frighten me. I sat at the chair without hesitation, lifted the cup and took a sip. The taste was faintly floral, familiar in a way that had no name. It tasted like closure. And when I looked out the rain-streaked window, I saw a shadow pass quietly through the garden. Elise. She didn't look at me. She didn't wave. She simply walked barefoot through the wet grass, her white dress dry, her face calm. Not lost, not afraid, just free. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Some stories don't end in confrontation. They end in release. I blinked, and she was gone. Not faded, not vanished. Just absent. And for the first time, her absence didn't feel like a hole. It felt like a chapter closed. In the corner of the room sat the small wooden box that once held her dress. It was empty now, but carved on the inside of the lid, in that same elegant looping script I'd come to know, was a final message. Thank you for remembering. I ran my fingers across the letters, smiling despite the tears that gathered. They weren't born of fear or confusion, but of the kind of grief that comes when something broken has finally been put down gently. I carried the box to the fireplace and set it there, not to burn, but to rest. The rain outside had slowed to a whisper, barely touching the roof. And in that quiet, I realized the house no longer mourned. It remembered, not with sorrow, but with love, with clarity, with space for new stories to begin, and for old ones to finally be left in peace. That night, I lit a single candle in the parlor and left every other light off. Not out of fear, but reverence. I wanted to feel the house breathe, to listen without distraction. I sat beside the window, the candle flickering softly, and opened my journal one last time. This time the pages were blank, not because they had been erased, but because they were ready for whatever came next. I held the pen, unsure where to begin, but the house spoke first. The chandelier above me tinkled, not from movement, but from the air itself shifting, settling. The clock in the hall struck once, then again. Not midnight, not noon. Just now. A moment outside of time, where past and present curved into each other like twin branches reaching for the same light. I wrote only a sentence. She is part of me now, and I am part of this house. And as I finished the last word, the weeping didn't return. Instead, there was humming, soft, familiar, Elise's lullaby. Upstairs, I passed the attic without looking inside. I didn't need to. It was no longer mine to open. Whatever it had held, grief, guilt, echoes, had been set free. The air in the hallway was lighter. The mirrors had turned again, all facing outward now. They no longer showed twisted reflections or unfamiliar memories. Just light. Just peace. One even caught the sun rising behind the clouds, painting the walls gold. I paused at the gallery. My portrait remained, but now it was different. The eyes were my own again, but softened, no longer searching, no longer asking. The brass plate beneath it had been changed. Clara Hawthorne, memory keeper. For the first time, I smiled, because now, the house didn't feel like a place I was trapped inside. It felt like a story I had helped finish. And when I returned to my room, the bed was made. The mirror was clean, and the window, cracked open slightly, let in the scent of rain and lilies. I lay down without dread, without tension, just stillness. And in the silence that followed, I heard a final whisper. Not from the walls, but from within me. Sleep now. We remember for you. It began again with the rain. Not gentle this time. Not forgiving. A storm rolled in heavy and fast, as if the house had exhaled too deeply and pulled the clouds down in return. I stood at the kitchen sink, watching the trees bend under the weight of wind. The stillness I had known for days unraveled, thread by thread. This was different. The kind of rain that didn't wash things clean, but pulled them back up from where they'd been buried. By late afternoon, the house had darkened. The windows fogged. The walls moaned softly, not in grief, but in strain, as if something deep inside was waking again. I walked the halls slowly, listening. No weeping, no voices. Just the sound of the storm wrapping itself around the house, like a tightening grip. When I passed the door at the end of the west hall, the one that had always remained locked, I noticed the floor beneath it was wet. Water seeped from the cracks around the door frame. Clear, cold, moving. I pressed my palm to the surface of the door. It vibrated faintly, like something behind it was breathing or drowning. I turned to get towels, but when I returned, the water had spread halfway down the hallway. The door remained shut, but I could hear something on the other side now. Not footsteps, not voices. Furniture, scraping slowly across a soaked floor. I forced the key, the brass one I had nearly forgotten, into the lock. It didn't resist. The door clicked open, and a gust of wet air rushed out, curling around my legs like steam. The room inside had changed. It was no longer a storage space, no longer forgotten. It was flooded, completely. Knee-deep, the floor, invisible beneath dark, moving water. Floating gently at the center of the room was a chair, an overturned teacup, and something small wrapped in lace. I stepped inside, the water swallowing my feet, then ankles, then calves. It was ice cold, but not dead. It moved with intention, pulling slightly at my steps, guiding me deeper. The light from the hallway faded behind me, swallowed by the stillness of the room. And just beneath the surface of the water, I saw them, toys. Dolls, blocks, a wooden rattle. Things meant for a child now resting at the bottom of a drowned memory. I waded forward, each step heavier than the last. The air in the room smelled of mold and rosewater, decay and innocence tangled together. The chair bumped gently against my leg as I passed, spinning lazily in the current. I reached down and lifted the lace-wrapped bundle from the water. It was light, almost empty. Inside, a pair of baby shoes, still tied together, the soles worn smooth. I held them in my hands and felt a weight rise in my chest I couldn't name. There were no windows in the room, yet the light shifted. The water reflected something that wasn't above me, a sky that didn't exist, gray, endless, swirling. I looked down and saw my own face staring back. Not as I was, but as a younger version of myself. 10, maybe 11. Wet hair plastered to my cheeks. Eyes wide with a fear I hadn't felt in years. The reflection mouthed something. I leaned closer. You saw her fall. I dropped the shoes. They hit the water silently and vanished. My breath caught in my throat as the words repeated in my head. You saw her fall. Images I had never invited came flooding in. The dock, slick with rain. a hand reaching, a scream swallowed by wind. Elise's face just before she disappeared, beneath the surface. I stumbled back toward the door, suddenly unsure whose memories were whose. Mine, hers, ours. The house had never drawn a line. The toys at my feet began to drift toward me. Not fast, not threatening, just drawn. Like I was a center of gravity for everything the house had kept submerged. I backed away, but they followed, gently bumping against my legs. I turned and tried to step out of the room, but the hallway beyond had vanished. In its place, water, stretching into darkness. Endless. The room no longer had walls, no ceiling, just a slow, patient tide. I stood still and closed my eyes. I could feel it now. Feel her now. Not Elise, but the other one. The one who had always stood just behind the mirror, just inside the portrait. The woman with my face, but not my voice. She wasn't hunting me. She wasn't haunting me. She was waiting. And now, in this room where time drowned, she finally whispered, "Let me show you what you forgot." I didn't resist. I let the voice guide me, let the water rise. When it reached my waist, I knelt. Not out of surrender, but instinct. The water was no longer cold. It was warm, too warm, like memory given shape, like breath turned liquid. I lowered my hands beneath the surface, searching without sight, and felt something hard brush my fingers. A tile, then another. A path, beneath the water, laid out long before I ever arrived. I followed it with my hands first, then my knees, crawling forward through the silent tide. The deeper I went, the clearer my thoughts became. The house wasn't punishing me. It wasn't keeping Elise trapped. It was preserving her, holding her in place until someone brave or foolish enough came to take the weight from its beams. The weight of a broken promise. The weight of a child lost not just to water, but to silence. My hand struck something solid. A wall. I felt upward and found a doorknob beneath the water. A door sunken in this drowned room. I hesitated, heart pounding, then turned the knob. The water didn't resist. The door opened inward, and as it did, the water began to drain, spiraling downward into a darkness that pulled at my breath. I crawled forward, soaked and shaking, through the threshold. The ground beneath me shifted from wood to stone. The room beyond was dry, dusty, silent. A small lantern burned low in the corner, though no one had lit it. I stood, dripping onto the stone floor, and looked around. Shelves lined the walls, each one filled with objects. Children's books, buttons, ribbons, locks of hair, offerings, memorials. And in the center of the room, a mirror stood upright, not silvered, just glass. And inside it, not my reflection, but Elise, sitting cross-legged, smiling faintly. Behind her stood the woman again, and this time, she spoke in my voice. "You left her behind. Now you have to carry her forward." I stepped closer to the mirror, no longer afraid of what I might see. The girl, Elise, looked up at me with eyes that no longer asked to be saved. She had waited long enough. She needed someone to carry her memory beyond these walls, someone to let her be more than a ghost. The woman behind her placed a hand on the child's shoulder, then turned to me and nodded once, slow and deliberate. I raised my hand to the glass. It was warm, The image shimmered. The mirror didn't reflect. It received. My palm sank through its surface as though into water, not wet, but fluid. Time itself, folding. I didn't go through. I didn't need to. All I had to do was touch. All I had to do was witness. The child stood, walked toward me, and placed her small hand against mine, separated only by that fragile barrier. A final offering, a final breath. Then both reflections faded, not in loss, but in peace. When I pulled my hand back, the mirror was empty. Just a sheet of still glass. Nothing behind it, nothing beneath it. And yet, everything remained. The warmth in my chest, the pulse in my palm. The name Elise engraved now, inside my memory. Not as a mystery, but as a story that had found its ending. I turned toward the shelves, took one of the ribbons from its resting place, and tied it around my wrist. As I left the chamber, the water behind me had vanished. The hallway was dry again. The light above flickered once, then steadied. The house no longer felt heavy, no longer weeping. It was breathing evenly, at peace. I walked barefoot down the corridor, the floor cool and clean beneath me. No voices called. No doors creaked. Just the quiet strength of a place that had finally been heard. And in the stillness of the now empty room behind me, a single sound echoed softly one last time. Not a cry, not a gasp. A laugh. A child's laugh. Soft. Free, like the sound of rain falling for joy instead of sorrow. The final morning arrived beneath a sky the color of ash. No wind, no thunder, just a soft drizzle that kissed the roof like a farewell. I stood on the front porch with bare feet, letting the wood press cool against my skin. The house behind me no longer loomed. It rested. The windows blinked softly with candlelight, not from fear, but memory. Every breath I took tasted like the end of a story, or the beginning of a legend. I walked the perimeter slowly, fingers grazing the walls as I passed. The boards no longer whispered. They remembered, quietly, gently, like bones retelling dreams. The rooms had shifted overnight, not in shape, but in feeling. The gallery was now a hall of peace. The parlor held no echoes. And in the kitchen, the chair I once feared now faced the table with calm purpose. At the center sat my journal, closed, waiting. I didn't open it. Not yet. I needed to visit the attic one last time. The climb was slow, not out of hesitation, but reverence. Every stair felt like part of a ritual, each creak an acknowledgement. When I reached the top, the door was already open. Sunlight, pale, filtered through soft rain, poured through the attic window, touching the mirror that had once held 1,000 faces. Now, it held none. Just light, just sky. The room was clean, bare. At its center lay a single object, the silver locket. I hadn't brought it back, but it was here, whole, dry. I picked it up and opened it. Inside were 2 photographs, one of Elise, smiling wide, the other of me, not as I was now, but as I had been when I arrived. Tired, searching, lost. The contrast didn't frighten me. It filled me with warmth, as if the house was showing me how far I'd come, and how far I still might go. I sat beside the mirror, cross-legged on the wooden floor, and held the locket against my chest. The house breathed with me, soft and slow. For a long time, there was only stillness. Then, faintly, like the fading hum of a music box, I heard it, the last weeping. Not from the walls, not from Elise, from the house itself. And in that sound, I heard gratitude. I returned inside, closing the door gently behind me. The sound echoed through the house like a heartbeat, slow and steady. I walked through each room without turning on a single light. I knew them all by feel now. I could move through the dark without fear. The walls hummed softly beneath my fingertips, no longer hiding their voice, but singing it. A lullaby made of storm winds and soaked wood, the song of endings, or perhaps the song of returning. Upstairs, the attic door was open, not pulled down, but open, as though the ceiling itself had parted for me. I climbed the steps without hesitation. The book lay in the center of the floor. Around it, the candle wax from nights before had dried into perfect rings, unchanged by time or temperature. I knelt beside the book. My name glowed faintly on the page, pulsing like a resting heartbeat. I placed my hand over it and waited. Don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes? Hours? The concept of time had unraveled like thread. The rain outside no longer came in waves. It was steady, rhythmic, like breath. I listened to it, eyes closed, feeling every drop through the roof, through the walls, through my skin. I was no longer a visitor in this house. I was a part of its structure, a living story bound in water and wood, not trapped, not lost, preserved. When I finally opened my eyes, I was no longer alone. A figure stood across the attic, familiar, though I had never seen her clearly before. She did not move, and neither did I. We simply watched each other, mirrors across time. Her face held no sorrow, only knowing. Behind her, more figures emerged from the wood, the rain, the memory, each one a chapter, a name, a night. The room was full, yet silent, not with fear, but with reverence. And then I understood. The ritual was not about summoning. It was about witnessing. This place didn't demand sacrifice. It offered remembrance. Those who entered and stayed didn't disappear. They became memory. They became voice. And when the time was right, they would guide the next. A storm may fall on many nights, but the last night only comes once. And when it does, you know it. You feel it in the rain. You feel it in the walls. The figures moved closer, though their feet made no sound. Their faces were calm, some unfamiliar, others almost like mine. I could feel their presence like warmth radiating from old sunlight, stored in the walls. They carried no malice, no judgment, only memory. I stood slowly, and they formed a circle around me, not trapping, but welcoming. I felt my body grow lighter, the house rising around me like breath caught between moments. I knew what came next. The journal opened once more, and this time, I didn't hesitate. I wrote a final line, the only truth I had left. I stayed. The ink sank quickly, accepted without resistance. A hum spread outward from the page, low and resonant, vibrating through the floor, the beams, the sky. The storm paused, For one still moment, everything stopped. No wind, no thunder, no breath. Just stillness, as if the world were watching, and then the attic began to dissolve. Not crumble, not collapse, but fade. The walls became mist, the floor, water. I was no longer inside the house. I was the house. I felt the door downstairs, the window upstairs, the heartbeat of footsteps long, gone and yet to come. I felt the presence of stories waiting to be written. I felt the weight of those who had stayed before me, and those still wandering toward the storm, unknowingly seeking their own ending. In that moment, I heard the doorbell ring. Not loud, just one soft chime. Somewhere, a new visitor had arrived. The rain had called them, and they had answered. And now they stood on the porch as I once had, wondering if the stories were true. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The wind moved the curtains. The floor welcomed their step. The storm wrapped itself around them like memory, warm and inevitable. And from the attic, where once I had sat alone, I watched them enter. A new beginning written beneath the last line. A new voice ready to ask, "What is this place?" And the house, as always, would answer without words. Just rain, just silence, just the long, slow rhythm of time, remembering itself through those brave enough to listen. And so I remained, not as a ghost, but as a guide. Not in shadow, but in silence. I didn't haunt the rooms or echo down the halls. I simply waited, like the house had once waited for me. Not every storm would bring someone, but when it did, when the rain fell just right and the trees bent low, I would be there, in the mirror, in the walls, in the sound of water dripping just beyond hearing. The house no longer needed to scream to be heard. It had found its voice through me, through Elise, through all the forgotten who had become remembered. It didn't hunger. It didn't rage. It remembered. And that was enough. Memory, after all, is its own kind of permanence, its own kind of peace. And if you find yourself one night standing before a door you don't remember opening, if the floor feels warmer than it should, and the storm outside suddenly softens, listen, not for voices, not for footsteps, just for the weeping, not of sorrow, but of relief. The sound of a story ending the way it always needed to. Because when a house remembers, it doesn't trap you. It frees you. And in that final freedom, you'll understand. The last weeping was never theirs. It was always ours. When all footsteps have faded and the candle burns to its final breath, the house does not fall silent. It sighs, cradling each memory like rain held in cupped hands. Its walls no longer ache, for grief has folded itself into the wood, woven not as weight, but as rhythm. A lullaby humming through floorboards, gentle as forgotten names. You may not see her, the girl in the white dress, or the woman with your eyes. But listen, and you'll feel them watching with kindness, not need. They don't want to be saved, only remembered. And when the rain falls just right, not heavy, not cold, just steady, that's them, whispering their story again. Because some places don't hold the past, they become it. And if you ever wonder why the mansion weeps, the answer is simple. The rain remembers what we forget.